Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the potential for Jacob Rees-Mogg, aka Lord Snooty, to be the first big casualty of the current Tory corruption scandal sweeping the nation. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the Conservatives have a large crisis on their hands. Blackadder once said that a large crisis requires a large plan. Not so for the Conservatives. Their instinct these days seems to be that the correct response to a large crisis is to hope that people forget about it while they carry on doing whatever it is that they were doing to create the crisis. The crisis for them, you see, is people finding out and being upset. If people don't forget about it, you would naturally suppose that Tory MPs will just have to jettison Boris Johnson. And sure enough, this is what would have to happen eventually. Remember, he is only in place because he is considered an electoral asset. He's not popular in the parliamentary party. He's not respected. He's there as a vote winner. If he's no longer a vote winner, gone. Naturally, Boris Johnson isn't really up for this plan. So before we get to that point, he will attempt to throw someone else under the bus. That means a senior member of the government needs to take the rap for this. Now, there have already been two casualties. Technically, Owen Paterson had to step down as an MP with possible elevation to the House of Lords after a discrete period of time. But he wasn't really responsible for the atrocity of trying to nobble the Standards Commissioner. That was the government. They were doing it on his behalf, but it was the government. Owen Paterson had no power to do that. The vice chair of the Conservative Party has also stepped down, but that was a protest resignation. They are not at all implicated in any corruption of any kind. They're clean, but want to stay that way. So if this issue doesn't just blow over in the public's mind, then before Johnson is sacrificed, someone else will have to fall on their sword first in order to try and save him. That someone might well be Jacob Rees-Mogg. As leader of the House, he is technically the guy who drove the attempts to weaken oversight over the standards of MPs. It was technically his authority that compelled MPs to vote to nobble the Standards Commission. Of course, it was really Boris Johnson deciding this policy. Lord Snooty simply carried it out. Not that he's blameless, because he should have refused, daring Johnson to sack him. Something he might do anyway to save his own skin at the end of the day. But Moggy is a tempting target, and it's interesting to note that some Tory media have him in their sights. Most recently, the Mail on Sunday wrote an article about his personal dodgy financial affairs, including not declaring £6 million worth of loans from his own tax haven-based company. The article makes clear that MPs have to declare taxable expenses, allowances and benefits. They also explain that the director's loans are classed by the government officially as a taxable benefit. It's a way of borrowing money with little or no interest. The Mail said that he'd effectively borrowed this £6 million at an interest rate of 0.8% when they reckon you or I would be paying 6% on the same amount. The implication being that he should have declared it, but he didn't. Now, I don't know whether these loans sneak through any procedural loopholes. As I've said before, the rules on MPs' financial affairs are written by MPs themselves, and they tend not to write rules that put too many constraints on them. There'll be all sorts of monies that MPs genuinely don't have to declare because they wrote the rules. The rules usually only come about in the first place in the face of a public backlash against corruption, so they tend to do the bare minimum to calm the public down. You know, MPs didn't just sit around one day and go, do you know what, we are a corrupt lot. We should put some rules in place to temper our behaviour. No. Every time there have been new rules, it's been as a result of a real blow up in the public. So I don't know if he's broken the rules or not, but that will be for the Commissioner to decide if this action is referred to her. But the point is that this Conservative supporting newspaper, and it's not the only one, has written an article that basically says, look, Jacob Rees-Mogg was the minister who pushed that vote to get Paterson off. He's also been up to no good with his own financial dealings. He's as bent as a £2 note, and they should really resign. There was no real mention in this article that I could see about Boris Johnson's dodgy financial affairs, for example. You know, and there have been a few articles since this fiasco blew up that have put Rees-Mogg in the frame. It also makes a lot of sense for Conservatives, whether in the media or in the party, to offer him up as the human sacrifice in order to placate the public. Like, unlike some other members of the government, there is no point in Rees-Mogg being there. He is as thick as mince, doesn't command a large following in Parliament, and isn't an electoral asset. Other senior members of the government generally have something to their credit. All Rees-Mogg has is this commitment to the hard Brexit course, which is the only essential feature of a cabinet minister these days. But there are plenty like that in the Conservative Party now. Remember that during the 2019 general election, Rees-Mogg was one of the 2 senior ministers who was told to shut his mouth for a few weeks. You know, he had actually said something early on. He wasn't initially banned from speaking. He said something. I can't remember what it was, but it upset a lot of people, and it was determined by party strategists that he would lose them votes, so they told him to keep quiet. Along with Priti Patel. She was told to keep quiet from the very start. He is also the minister who lied to the Queen in order to unlawfully prorogue Parliament in 2019. But I doubt the Tory press will make much of that, because that treads on their Brexit toes. After all, much of them supported the action at the time. Now, we can notice that Rees-Mogg has not stepped down at this point. I've held off talking about this for a few days just to see if anything happened. It hasn't. Johnson hasn't forced him to, so there's no immediate pressure. I don't think it would be imminent. But bear in mind that Boris Johnson has sacked very few cabinet ministers. Generally, on the very few times that he has, it's been because they've refused to go along with his authoritarian atrocities, like former Justice Secretary Robert Buckland. I think the only 2 exceptions that I can really think of have been Gavin Williamson and Matt Hancock. Williamson was just simply too incompetent, even for Johnson, and unlike people like Dominic Raab, who's just as useless, didn't pose a problem for him by banishing him to the backbenchers. Dominic Raab could have caused a lot of trouble. Gavin Williamson, not at all. Hancock was sacked because Rupert Murdoch wanted him gone because he kept resisting the moves to do nothing at all about the coronavirus pandemic. So there really isn't a precedent for sacking someone in Rees-Mogg's position as yet. But like I say, if the Conservatives continue to do poorly in the polls, and that at the moment is a big if, we can't assume these things, we'll need to wait a few weeks. But if that does happen, then Conservative MPs will start to get very nervous. It won't just be a blip, because the Conservatives have gone down in the polls before and then they come back up again. So they'll be just waiting to see if it's another blip. If it's not, there has to be a move to do something. And there is a move as well to bring the corruption scandals back into the public eye today. There's been a few other things going off on the news, distracting people. But in Parliament, later today, Labour are forcing a vote on a measure that would ban MPs from being able to take advocacy or consultancy roles. Now, it's not banning second jobs as such, because that would be a more complex issue that needs proper debate. But as someone recently said, advocacy work isn't a second job, it's being paid to do your first job differently. There are examples aplenty of Tory MPs paid by the gambling industry to stand up in Parliament and argue against regulations in the gambling industry. Paid by oil companies to stand up and argue against climate emergency policies. The list goes on. It's corruption. It is corruption to be paid by a company in order for you to give them a competitive advantage through government contracts or legislation. So there will be a vote later today to ban this practice. The vote will fail, of course. But Labour are not bringing this vote in order for it to succeed. They've already promised much tougher action in government that goes beyond merely advocacy work. The purpose of this vote is to force Conservative MPs to say whether they are in favour of or against this form of corruption in Parliament. There are a lot of new Tory MPs who are not themselves tainted by this corruption, and they are in the target seats for Labour. Most of them do not have second jobs like this. They haven't been on the take, as far as we know. But Labour want to hammer the Conservatives on corruption at the next general election. But like I say, most of the key targets will be the seats of these newer MPs. But these newer MPs will intend to stand on their own seats and claim that they have nothing to do with this corruption scandal, that they are not personally implicated. So that reduces the power of an anti-corruption message. But if they vote to allow their Tory colleagues to carry on shilling for corporate interests against the public interest, they will find it much more difficult to state that case. I haven't taken any money for advocacy, they will say. Yes, their challenger will retort. But you voted to let others do it, didn't you? You had a chance to ban it and you didn't. So Labour are not letting this issue go. They see it as their hill to fight the election on. Brexit's too messy, apparently, at the moment. The Conservatives just lie and outbid Labour on public services, but the Conservatives do not have access to a smokescreen big enough to hide their dodgy dealings. And this can be kept in the public eye. Someone will need to be held responsible. Boris Johnson doesn't fancy it being him, and the media do not seem to be making it clear that they're happy to go along with it. So dump rees-mogg will be the obvious solution there. But we'll have to see what happens in the new year, perhaps, because like I said, Tory MPs at the moment will just be on a wait and see mode. In fact, that's generally the impression we're getting. They're on wait and see what happens in the polls. Because remember, what they're outraged about is not the corruption. The corruption's been going on forever. What they're outraged is that the public saw it and don't like it. And if the issue hasn't gone away, well, they're going to have to do something. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.